The topic that we have for today is agenda setting. So we have some general questions. For example, how are the topic and remit of global citizens assemblies set? How should they be? And as I was saying, we have two wonderful guests today. We have first, and I would like to introduce her, we have Kalypso Nicolaidis. She is a chair in global affairs at the School of Transnational Governance in the European University Institute, where she convenes the European Union Institute Democracy Forum. And she is currently on leave from the University of Oxford. And she was a professor also at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and at the École Nationale d'Administration in Paris. And we also have a welcome Canning Malkin. Canning is a deliberative democracy researcher whose primary focuses are climate citizens assemblies. She has been working recently also, and she has published a technical paper together with Nardine on artificial intelligence. Very recently, you can see this technical paper in the GloCAN webpage. She also works on governance and transnational and global citizens assemblies. Canning is a founding member of GloCAN. She is a research assistant with Democracy R&D. She has been working for, I think, 2 years on the New Frontiers of Deliberative Democracy project. And most recently, she is a research coordinator at the ISWE Foundation. So welcome, Kalypso and Canning. We look forward to this conversation. So we will start with a general intervention, short one from both of you about our general topic. I will remind our main question. So who sets the agenda in global citizen deliberation? Of course, this is both a descriptive and a normative. We are also concerned with who should set the agenda in a global citizen deliberation. How are the topic and remit of global citizens assemblies currently set? And as I was saying, how should they be set? So we can start with Kalypso. Welcome, Kalypso.
Thank you so much, Felipe. And what an honor and a joy to contribute to launching this wonderful series that will be so precious for the community of us who are trying around the world to renew democracy. And GloCAN is playing a very important role in this story. And indeed, I am here to, in part, speak for this project, which I'm co-leading, called the Democratic Odyssey, which is in fact evaluated in an ongoing way by GloCAN, and we're very happy with that. So we have this kind of two-layer way of advancing. And so I want to go directly to the topic as you just said it, Felipe. Who sets the agenda? And can we perhaps in our conversation start with what we can call the democratic gap? So right now I'm speaking from Italy, but I think, I mean, we just had amazing elections in Mexico. The gap is that between very often what is discussed in normal electoral setting and what people really care about, the agenda that people care about. There's just been a survey on the EU front about this gap where people want to talk about their lives, what affects their lives, but not just kind of, okay, fine, you know, price levels and things like that, but also simply the social model, justice, big issues. So it's not as though sometimes elites say, well, people care about small issues and we, the elite, we care about big issues, important issues like war and peace and Ukraine and the global order. But no, it's just a different way of approaching. So perhaps we can call this the democratic gap. It's a substantive gap and not just a process gap between what happens in elections and between elections. And we care about what happens between elections. And so we want to ask what global and regional assemblies, how we can have a different way of setting the agenda. And here I simply want to say what the kind of lessons we have reached with the Democratic Odyssey. So in 1 minute and in a nutshell, for those of you who are not familiar with the Democratic Odyssey, we're having a conversation really at two levels to answer this question. One is the level of our campaign, our big goal, which is to create a permanent citizen assembly in the EU, a standing assembly by rotation, inclusive, an assembly that would travel around Europe, that will be much also translocal and not only transnational in the classic sense of sortition. And I could say much more about this, but this is not the topic. But the point is, we are trying, you're visible. Sorry, there is presence in my place. Anyway, so at what first level, you can see that who sets the agenda in my own home, huh? So at the first level, we are envisioning an assembly, a regional. So of course it's at the EU level, but I think the lessons that we're drawing are also valuable for a global assembly. And this assembly would set the agenda for itself, except for the first time, probably. But even then, we are envisioning a process whereby the assembly would have really three types of agendas. One type is indeed policy input, the kind of stuff we've seen with the ECPs in the EU, specific policy input. But perhaps more importantly are the two other types of agenda, which is on one hand, agenda setting, really broad agenda setting for the polity, and second, or for specific institutions, and then monitoring, accountability of power as to what they promise to do in general, and not only in legislative terms. So that's this assembly. It sets its own agenda. That's the point of democratic, what I call democratic respect, respecting the people. And it goes against a lot of what we see institutionally, where the agenda of assemblies fall from the sky. Like, who decided that this assembly should speak about, food waste? I mean, maybe there are very, very good reasons, but at least when these are institutional, we should know how you got there. And this leads me to the second level. So the first level is the assembly as we imagine it, a kind of Platonic ideal. The second is what we're actually doing right now with what we call a proof of concept, a prototype, a pilot assembly that is going to meet five times, etc. And there, who sets the agenda to start with, to get the ball rolling, is a network, a constitutive network, a constituent network. As we've seen with the Global Assembly, right now our network is about 500 people, and anyone can join, anyone on this call can join. The two principles are radically inclusive and radically transparent. And it is about implementing our theory of change. So with input from bottom up, from the way in which civil society actors and others see the relevant agenda, and top down, what is being done at certain levels. So top down these days is when we meet in September, we'll just have a new European Parliament and Commission. What is the agenda for the next 5 years for Europe? And as we've been reflecting on this very intensely, and I'm almost done for my 5 minutes, Felipe, but we actually had a series of meetings of this infamous constituent network, and a process that I can also discuss. But basically, we came up with 5 criteria for an agenda that made sense for our assembly, our proof of concept. That it should be a pressing popular issue with mass appeal, 1. 2, topics that have political and social impact. Sometimes people talk about hot potatoes, but the important thing is that the impact is important, that it's cross-cutting, that it touched several themes, that it's future-focused, because we're talking about intergenerational conversations, and finally, that it's demonstrative and strategic for what we're trying to do as the Democratic Odyssey, show what people can come up with. So these are our criteria. And from there, we have actually come up with an agenda, which in the second round, I can share with you, but I think my time is up. So this is the process. And my important message is that we're trying to draw lessons from the global assembly that happened, from many other existing assemblies. This is not happening in a vacuum, and trying to do in such a way that when our assembly first meets in September, there will be a lot of leeway for the assembly itself to refine the topic. I will put the topic as we came up with it in the chat, but what we're looking at is really to empower citizens to refine and draw the topic themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalypso. This is really wonderful, and thank you for sharing with us this criteria. That's very, very interesting. Thank you. Now we will hear from Canning. Malkin, I have to say also that Canning is a co-author of the second technical paper that was published by GloCAN last year. So she will be sharing with us some of the findings of this wonderful technical paper, which is named Agenda Setting in Transnational and Global Citizens Assemblies. Canning, we're very happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Felipe. It's been, if anyone's not familiar with Felipe, he's wonderful, and it's a privilege to be introduced by him. Hi, everyone. My name is Canning Malkin. I apparently did not get the memo on punchy, and so what I prepared is not punchy enough, and we're going to go a little bit off the cuff here. Our paper, as Felipe just said, and as Kalypso very rightly pointed to, is on agenda setting. There are a number of issues within deliberation that Kalypso very rightly pointed out and very eloquently pointed out, of how these are meant to be deliberative processes, people-centered processes. And there are a number of ways that I'm sure we're all familiar with in which they either are not or are sort of covertly subverted so that the attention is taken away from the principal focus being people-centered politics, or at least politics that allows citizens and non-citizens, people, to be the center of the discussion and what their needs are to be the center of the discussion. So very quick overview of our paper. We analyzed 4 transnational and international citizens' assemblies and looked at their agenda setting processes along a number of lenses. The first thing that we began noticing is that agenda setting is a massive hole in the research that was very rightly pointed out in Felipe and Ricky Dean's and all of their other co-authors GloCAN technical paper on the backstage governance of citizens' assemblies. And along with it being a hole in the research, it is also often overlooked, under-considered in the construction of citizens' assemblies. Who gets to decide what is being discussed has implications on all parts of deliberation, from the experts that are selected, the materials that are given, the parameters of the discussion, what is considered within the topic or on topic for a given policy problem or question, all stem from what is the agenda and who got to set it. Immediately, what we noticed in our research, which included discussions and interviews with practitioners, as well as civil servants and representatives from the political institutions that commissioned or were closely linked to these 4 case studies, was that agenda setting is a manifestation, just one manifestation of the power dynamics that are sort of held in and encapsulated in the commissioning and implementation and designing of citizens' assemblies. In order for us to better understand who actually has a good portion of the power in these people-centered discussions, we have to understand who was in the room when it was decided what was going to be discussed and what was allowed, what not necessarily allowed, what was going to be included in that discussion. So we've highlighted a couple of things. Firstly, what is being deliberated on is overlooked. And second, how is what is being deliberated on, or that decision, and examine a manifestation of power politics, or at least of power dynamics within citizens' assemblies. What we came to find was that in order to in order to dispel a lot of the power politics and power dynamics within agenda setting, you have to understand what the principles were, and then also what the other options are. One of our case studies was the European Citizens Consultations that had happened in 2006, which was a completely civil society organized or commissioned event that then was later docked to the European Commission. And in that, they had a meta agenda setting event, which was essentially an assembly to decide on the agenda for the actual assembly. This obviously has a lot of practical constraints. That takes a lot more time, a lot more money, a lot more capacity in order to be able to expertly and successfully facilitate and organize one of these meta agenda setting events. Additionally, though, what we learned was that from nearly, if not all of our interview partners, practitioners, civil servants, representatives of political institutions, all prefer, or at least were supportive of, citizen input in agenda setting practices. These practical limitations, as well as the power politics of political entities having a say in what is discussed, or assuring that it aligns with given political agendas or political aims, was a central hurdle that many of our interview partners cited as reasons for not including citizens in the agenda setting process. We, as a collective of authors on this paper, came to the conclusion that, almost without exception, including the citizen, or at least the participant, in the agenda setting process is critical to actually having a democratized and citizen-focused event. The practicalities obviously get in the way, but there have to be further discussions on how we can center the citizen or center the participant, if not the collective, in what is being discussed. Because as Kalypso said, the issues being discussed have to be relevant to the lived experience of the person deliberating. Otherwise, their policy and moral weight is lost. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you very much. And thank you for presenting the main results of this technical paper. I cannot recommend enough these technical papers that you will find in GloCAN, in the GloCAN webpage. This is an incredible work. I don't know, Mel, how many technical papers there are published now? I think there are like 7 or 8, something like that.
9 now. We are at 9.
9 technical papers. This is a huge work. I can say it's really wonderful, different topics, very practical information, but also very robust and very profound. So congratulations to you, Kenny, for this work on agenda setting, and also to Francisca Meyer and to Nardine Almer, who were also contributors and co-authors of this report. I will ask first a question to you both, Kalypso and Canning, before going to some questions from the public, which I also want to thank for all you to be here. So I guess that my question is about the complexity of the agenda setting process. Because I perceive that when we discuss about agenda setting, we ask, for example, who sets the agenda? We are looking for a single actor. We are usually thinking in a single actor. So this is the commissioner or the citizens who sets the agenda. It's like a yes or no question. But in reality, I think that it's different. So it seems that agenda setting is something more complex. It's longer as well. So for example, a topic can have, of course, subtopics. You can have different approaches. Each topic can have a specific question. So really, agenda setting seems to be something much much bigger. And this might suggest that potentially in practice you could allow more people to be in the room of agenda setting, for different actors to be in the room, and to have somehow distribution of work between different actors in the agenda setting process. So my question is, if you believe this room exists, and what would be some ways to distribute power? Because I think that this, Canning was talking, and this is very important. Agenda setting is, of course, about power. So what are some ways to distribute power and responsibilities and specific tasks in the agenda setting process? That's the first question I have. And the second question related to this one is, if you think that sortition has a space in these different tasks, because we usually think, for example, okay, so we have our randomly selected citizens' assemblies, and the agenda setting will be set by experts or by citizens in a digital process or somehow. Do you think that it will be worthy to think about citizens' assemblies designed and convened for the purpose of defining the agenda? Do you think that sortition has also an important space in the agenda setting process? Or do you feel, or do you think that it would be better for other type of actors? This is also plausible, stakeholders, groups of interest, politicians, that it would be better for them to have the leading voice in the agenda setting process, or it would be better to have randomly selected citizens. So these are my two questions for both of you. Kalypso, if you would like to start.
Well, these are questions we're agonizing over, Felipe. I just want to stress that, you know, it's not for nothing that we're asking these questions here with GloCAN, and nobody has, you know, a ready-made answer, although, of course, Canning made a wonderful case for the findings, the general findings of the paper, the technical paper that is so useful. But the thing is, you know, once you put these great principles into practice, we spent months in the Democratic Odyssey with our large constituent network, which, in response to your question, is completely inclusive. Anybody can sign up and be a member. So we don't know, you know, who's going to be there, because we believe that democracy is a bit messy. You can't control everything. So radical inclusiveness is about that for this kind of process. And indeed, it's a very drawn-out process, because we were trying to use our constituent network, to give our constituent network a power as a proxy for what would one day be an assembly. Yes, with a secretariat, of course, but the secretariat only just puts things together. So we tend to believe, in terms of the blueprint for your second question, that this assembly, first of all, would be some sort of combination of sortition on one side, but also presence of other actors, or at least several sortition pools. This is where we are now, and it's evolved a lot. So we have the classic sortition pool, which of course you can then draw the assembly from in different ways, with different criteria, and that can be debated. But then you have a separate pool of civil society actors from which you also draw. So we do believe that we need to find ways to push back against the risk of, you know, atomized global society, that there is politics matters. That's how Canning started her intervention. And so how do we make these assemblies actually more political, or as political as we need them to be? So that there's a whole other conversation about composition and evolving composition. And in our view, global or European doesn't mean that it shouldn't be local. So trend scale is very important. We envisage an assembly where people come from one city, meet, send ambassador to another city, in addition to transnational. All of them pooled, a sortition from different pools. So it's a bit of a complex thing, but we hope to mix different realities and life experiences in the kind of ideal type assembly. Now, in terms of but now we are at a moment with Democratic Odyssey where we had to kind of fashion the very first question that will get the ball rolling of our assembly. And your question alluded to G1000, where you have agenda setting that's sortition, and then a separate group that is discussing that agenda. We're trying to make it more simple. I mean, this is a great model. It's not for nothing. Everybody's inspired by it. But it's a model for 80,000 people, very local process. When you go more bigger scale in some kind of maybe paradoxical way, we think you need to be more simple. Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is not for the assembly itself. Yes, the assembly, but it is for the public at large. I don't like to say maxi public, mini public, but it's for the public sphere. It's for the democratic sphere. And so what is happening there should be visible to the broader public, exciting, fun, have impact, meaningful, etc. But find also porous ways in which this agenda setting, rolling agenda, gets appropriated, owned by the public at large. I mean, of course, this is an ideal. People may not be interested in all the problems that we know. This is why we chose as our first question. I put it in the chat. And anyone who's interested, again, we will discuss further, but we thought that people coming should reflect on their own experience of recent crisis in Europe and think about, well, what should the EU do? How should it change so that next time around we can weather the storm, we can overcome the crisis? And then we have a number of subtopics, but it's for them to choose, pick and choose, reframe, etc. And hopefully by the end of the day, think about how the people, how democracy can affect this capacity of the EU or the UN or whoever, or societies to address the world we're in.
Thank you, Kalypso. And I really found very interesting what you said about first making things simpler. I think that this is important. Sometimes we think a lot about design and we think that complex things are better, and it's good to be simple and to keep it simple in these processes as well. And I also loved what you said about you can't control everything. You can't control everything. It seems that sometimes we want to control everything, and democracy is not about control. It's more about freedom and creative possibilities that emerge in contexts that are not very or always completely controlled contexts. So I think that this is very important when we think about agenda setting, and in general, when we think about the design of citizens' assemblies. Thank you, Kalypso. And now, please, Canning.
I'll respond briefly to your point, your first question, Felipe, as I think Kalypso is best suited to respond to the practicality. Unfortunately, have not yet had the experience to run a deliberative process. I can speak to the theoretical side, though, to your question about room for more stakeholders and not singular actors in the agenda setting process. To give a bit more detail, the European Citizens Consultations from 2006 held a agenda setting event in which 200 randomly selected European citizens were brought to, I believe, Brussels to discuss in person with experts on a whole range of issues, not experts ranging in opinion on a given issue, but experts on a large number of issues to learn about what exactly they would like their fellow citizens to discuss. They came to, which was pretty radical for the time, climate as one of their issues in 2006. We were all, I was not yet a true cognizant human being, but at that point in time, we were generally worried, not nearly as worried as we are now about climate. That was a radical finding that our interview partners reflected on, that citizens would pick something that felt so far away and not yet imminent to discuss. I think that certainly from a theoretical point of view, or at least from a research point of view, there's absolutely room to have a multi-stakeholder agenda setting event in the vein of the G1000, the European Citizens Consultations, in which you are able to have off the dome, citizens, politicians, potentially experts, people with, interests in XYZ policy, to be able to come together and discuss what the agenda should be in a multifaceted way, an interdisciplinary way. But as Kalypso was saying, at least from where I'm sitting, these assemblies should and must be reflective of people's lived experiences. They also have to be political, and they also have to have some teeth, or at least some skin in the game in the decision-making process. So there are a whole host of practical limitations and hurdles to get over in order to achieve such a multi-stakeholder agenda-setting event. That doesn't mean it's not necessarily something to strive for, or something that could work very well if given the perhaps the correct political moment, or if citizens' assemblies were simply just, allowed to exist as political entities rather than social ones, or simply social ones, I should say. So to answer your question, I think, yeah, my answer is yes. Why not? Let's, there's room for innovation in innovative democracy. And I think it's something for me to think on as a researcher, and it's also something that we should be sure to include. It's a conversation that should be inclusive in and of itself. It shouldn't just be people thinking about it. It should be people doing it, people who have participated in deliberation. It should be anyone who wants to think about the ways we can make this better and address the power inequities in deliberation from a more systematic point of view should be involved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Canning. And now we'll pass to the public, to some questions from the public. I see one raised hand from Ricky Dean, and I have to say also that Ricky is also a co-author of another technical paper from GloCAN, this one on governance, and I think that this one will be presented in the next session or in 2 weeks. So thank you, Ricky, for being here, and please go on.
Yeah, my pleasure. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually been ordered through the backstage governance of this meeting to ask a question, so I thought I would do that. So I really like Kalypso's point about sort of connecting the agenda setting into the broader society. And of course, in many democracies, and also within the European Union, we already have a kind of system for raising these sorts of society-wide issues through initiative processes. And of course, in the US in particular, there's been this attempt to connect the citizens' initiative review with kind of referendums and citizens' initiative processes. So I wondered what you thought about this as a kind of means to set the topics by which citizens' assemblies usually would then discuss. Because obviously at the moment they tend to actually come from elite spaces rather than bottom up from citizens.
Yeah. Kalypso, would you like to?
Yes, I mean, this is a topic, Ricky, that's dear to my heart. So I'm really happy that you asked this question, because a lot of our thinking has to do with the connection between traditional electoral democracy. I don't say representative democracy because, of course, citizen assemblies are representative in their own ways. So electoral democracy on one hand, with these two pillars of participatory democracy, which is direct democracy, including ECIs, and ultimately referenda, and of course, deliberative democracies. And indeed, the connection goes 2 ways, right? I mean, one is that agenda setting. This is why if we have processes of citizens' initiative in different polities, then it does cast a wide net, and it's quite representative. So the Californians indeed are thinking a lot about this. For instance, we're talking with them. But of course, in Europe, we have our own ECIs, and of course, the frustration linked to ECIs, because none of them are really implemented, including the water ECI, the various animal rights ECI, and right now there's going to be a new one on food rights. very interesting. And these are huge hints as to what citizens care about. Indeed. So I completely agree with the implication of the question. Now, of course, there are caveats. How wide or how specific should citizen assemblies are? I'm working currently on a proposal by the European Parliament to create a citizen assembly on biodiversity, starting with pollinators. And that's very linked to a citizen assembly, sorry, in an ECI, right? We had the bees ECI. And there is indeed this idea that the Parliament could sponsor an assembly on pollinators. So it's already, of course, in the works. I'm also fascinated by the other side of the question, which is how the assembly itself could write an initiative, could lead to an initiative, which is also very nice, because part of what we're all trying to think about is how do you create deliberative filters in direct democracy? Direct democracy has its own advantages of aggregation and breadth, but on the other hand, we need deliberation, no need to persuade this group of people. So how do you best connect the two? And I would say in these two directions, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure Canning has stuff to add. Lots more to say, but this is what I would.
I don't think I have anything to add that is unique from what Kalypso said. There's a question in the comments, but there's also should be room for people to ask questions, I think, in person.
Thank you, Canning, and thank you, Kalypso. We have a question in the chat. I will from Johnny Stormont. I will read it. It says, should meta assemblies, and I like this. Here in Bogota, we are also using the concept of meta deliberation for naming citizens assemblies convened to design further citizens assemblies. So I like to see the word meta here. I think that it's a new concept. It's emerging as a new concept in the field. Should meta assemblies remit also include designed elements beyond the agenda topic, such as scale, fancy scale or not, duration, frequency of meetings, expert group members, governance structure, output format, and where outputs are designed to land? This is the question from Joni. So I don't know, maybe Canning, would you like to start this one?
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly interesting question. Simply from the perspective that, or I should say primarily from the perspective that I'm aware of conversations happening in our field of larger questions of governance and where there are roles for citizens and participants in the governance of citizens' assemblies and deliberations. The obvious, challenges that people pose being, it'll take more time, it'll clog up an already highly bureaucratic system, it'll just slow things down. There are, as I'm aware, a number of proposals to have either randomly selected or self-selected members of given citizens' assemblies. I'm aware that they're, as I understand, implemented this in the French Convention on the End of Life, to have participants, representatives from those people discussing and deliberating involved in governance questions surrounding the assembly itself. Personally, if I were to give an opinion on this, I think that there are, without question for me, more ways in which participants, those participating in the deliberation, those who had been randomly selected, as well as citizens who can sort of participate concurrently with the deliberation, to have more room within the governance structure and thus the agenda setting process. Where the agenda setting sort of starts to blur with questions of design and topic and duration and expert selection, I think deserves a bit more critical thought than what's coming to me in this moment right now. From a first perspective, I think, yeah, I think that there should be certainly more opportunities for participants to say, I want, not just that I want more experts on water and marine life in a climate assembly, but also we need more experts on a given subtopic or a topic that has not been presented to citizens yet, a tangential one that has to be further discussed, or where they get to discuss, right? If we're talking about in-person citizens assemblies, the location means a lot to people who have to travel, who can't afford to travel, who all the rest of it. My personal really immediate response is yes, I think that there's definitely room for more citizen and participant involvement in governance questions as they relate to agenda setting.
Thank you, Canning. Kalypso, would you like to?
Yeah, just to add, because Canning covered it really well. I mean, but just to add to this, I think there's kind of, at least there are many logics, many ways of answering this. And what I'm discovering, just like if I can be a bit confessional here, you know, I'm more kind of democratic theory person, have been for, and somehow my political life was always like separate. And now I feel that I've been involved in a process of developing theories and concepts by doing through this, and with a wonderful Democratic Odyssey team and a consortium of 25 organizations, including GloCAN. And the point is you're developing theories and approaches by doing. And I think many of us on this call, you know, are feeling that it's, you know, it's by doing that you kind of come up with new ways of answering this. It makes sense. I mean, life is inductive, deductive, right? And so, so in this question, I think there is the ideal to me is self-empowerment. You know, it's assemblies and revolutions. They decide what they're going to do and where they're going to meet and how often and all of that. And that's power to the people. We need to go all the way down, all the way to power to the people in these logics. On the other hand, of course, there are, first of all, practicalities, budgets, and things like this, that constrain what they can do and what we can do. And also there is the P word, power. So how much do we care about, you know, if our theory of change is bottom up, but also top down, because we live in societies with barbarian states and politicians and parliaments and governments and executive preemption and power. So how do we connect this ideal of bottom up, of self-empowerment of society through assemblies and the realities of power? That's our theory of change. And this is why this kind of I like the meta assembly. We called it constituent network, like assemblée constituante, you know, the network itself of many actors, including veteran citizens, including people in technocracy, including experts, but very self-appointed, of course, not a different logic, you know, needs to also be in that game. And part of the question is, you know, how do these different logics merge? The top-down and self-empowerment and the bottom-up self-empowerment and the top-down realities of this world. And finally, yeah. So I would just leave it at that. Much more to say, but but in the Democratic Odyssey, we are trying to think about how the assembly, as it will meet, can then decide on the next step. We have 5 meetings to kind of as a proxy for what would be a permanent assembly. And while we prepare a lot the first, we're kind of, this is the uncertainty and the messiness. We're hoping that the citizens themselves will decide and will have a process, will help that, of course, of self-governance as we move on.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalypso. We have one raised. I saw one raised. Oh, but where is it now? Tim Davies, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I think thanks,
Oh.
Kalypso. You covered some of it, but I'll try and put the question still. And thank you so much for the insights from everyone. But I think that piece of power was what I was curious about, of that kind of the funding constraint often for this kind of work, or the fact that we have these very real powers that restrict the scope of what could be done bottom up, and whether there's thinking around what kind of ideal institutional arrangements we get. Because when we look at those existing power structures, political structures, they have treasury power. They have the ability for a sustainable funding source to keep running, to be there, and therefore to have some of that agenda setting. Although I think of parliamentary spaces and that really interesting kind of, in the UK system, space given to opposition debates, the moments, the 10 minutes given to putting a new issue on the agenda within the wider system that but over time become powerful. But I'm just curious, because so much of this work at the moment involves finding a funder who will resource that thing, and that massively constrains which agendas can be set, and whether our approach should be seeking the kinds of funding endowments that can sustain this with freedom to agenda set, or working with participants, constituent citizens, to understand the power landscape into which that agenda setting has to take place.
Should. Felipe, do you want me to respond directly, or?
Yeah, please, please.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you, Tim. I mean, this is exactly why we have this campaign for a permanent citizen assembly that would have its own ongoing budgets. I mean, all of us in this world here on this goal, if there is number one constraint on all our ideals is budget and who sponsors you. And, you know, right now we're operating under SERVE funding, as well as some additional foundation funding. It takes most of our time instead of thinking about the wonderful topics that we are talking about now on this call. I mean, it's mad, right? And we all know what I'm talking about. So the question is, this is why the ideal is that there would be an agency in the EU and then elsewhere in other regions and globally, with a budget and with huge accountability itself, a highly democratic agency, not a technocratic one, with a permanent budget. I mean, one option is that it would be attached to the European Parliament, and I hope it will happen one day, because that's about self-empowerment, and we can all demonstrate. I'm always having conversations with the powers that be of, oh my God, these assembly, what you propose is so expensive, etc. No, I mean, if you look at the cost of the European Parliament, 3 million per day. Sorry, this is an old number, but what we are talking about is actually not more expensive. And it's the stakes for democracy are so high. And that's the only way. Institutionalization, I deeply believe it, in creating a standing body is the only way to counteract the issue of asymmetric power and entrenchment of agendas. However much, you know, people of great goodwill and intentions in, say, the EU Commission are putting forward European citizen panels, but it will always still be a choice from top down. And it will be hostage to cherry picking, to the next day we have a commissioner who doesn't care about democracy. It won't happen. So that is our own response at DO on the issue of power. But there is also a question, Felipe, from Luca. And I'm just going to put in the chat a paper that in part responds to Lafont, but I think a lot of what we're talking about is a response to, you know, we have very legitimate critiques in academia of what we discuss, and especially transnational assembly and global assemblies are very prone to being criticized. And I think we should take all these criticism about randomness and democracy so seriously that they define the kind of caveat and improvements that we are all working on. Because I'm fascinated by the fact that here is a conversation about agenda setting, but many of you are going upstream on composition or downstream on governance of the ongoing assembly. So everything is connected, and the conversation with those who are critical of this field is very important. So yeah, much more to say, but we don't have time. I'm just going to put a link here.
Thank you, Kalypso. Canning?
If I can just respond quickly to something Tim said, what I've heard is, if we can distill down further what Tim is saying, it becomes, just as Kalypso was saying, because all of this is interconnected, a question of docking and whether or not we do dock to political institutions. Certainly from what I was able to gather from my research, and we found only one transnational example of a citizen assembly that wasn't immediately conceived of in a political context, but was rather conceived of because the EU was getting a lot of bad press, and deliberative democracy experts wanted to convene an assembly to allow citizens to have their say on what the EU should look like, what it's doing, and thus respond to the bad press that the EU was getting in the early noughties. There are opportunities, as I see it, for bottom-up citizen deliberation. I know that is something that we are working very, very intensely on at ISWE. There are, of course, obvious challenges, as Kalypso alluded to, if not directly said, which is that it's hard to conceive of citizens assemblies not in social spaces, but as political spaces in and of themselves. Certainly, something to strive for is citizen deliberation that is politically powerful in and of itself. We are not there yet, as I see it, but there are certainly avenues for empowering people. And there was a question in the comments about mobilizing civic and civil movements to have their own citizens assemblies, which is something we're also working on at ISWE. So this is to say, the question of docking has direct implications on agenda setting, and agenda setting has direct implications on the questions of docking. It's all interconnected. There's, as I see it, room for more innovation and ingenuity on either sides of that equation. But certainly, as we look for political impact, for the moment right now, we are looking at the most expedient way to do that is docking to a political institution.
Thank you, Kenny. As it always happens, and now we have a lot of questions, both in the chat and people interested in but we have still a little bit of more time. And I'm happy that you have been already answering some of the questions that are on the chat. So thank you both, Kalypso and Kenny. I want to give the microphone to Nardine Alner. She is also co-author of the technical paper with Franziska Meyer and with Canning, and she's also a co-author of a recent technical paper with Canning Malkin for GloCAN on artificial intelligence. I think that this is the last one, so we will hear from her. Nardine.
Thanks, Felipe. Sorry, what was the specific question?
Oh, I thought that you wanted to ask a question.
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to speak. I guess it's a nice way to weave into Canning's last remarks that some processes or projects have been in response to bad reputation, and maybe that's what happened with the deliberative processes that were commissioned with big tech companies. Except Anthropic is a lesser known AI company, but it's backed by Amazon and Google, so we could consider it big tech in that sense. And so we see a huge correlation between the motivation to commission a deliberative democratic process or a project with some controversial or some controversies that have happened and gained a lot of public attention. So for Facebook, they did commission a citizens' assembly on climate change. We don't know much about this because it's not publicized. And based on our research, it seems like the idea for a citizen assembly was shut down because it's not compatible with that scale for global deliberation with a huge user base at Meta. And so the next thing was trying a deliberative poll, and that was on sexual abuse and harassment in the virtual spaces of the metaverse. And this comes around the time that a lot of people are actually worried about sexual exploitation in these spaces and what happens in terms of content moderation if we're at all, in fact, Meta should govern the discrepancy between public spaces that could be accessed through the metaverse and what happens privately as well. The next controversy was that for DeepMind, Google DeepMind, which is an AI company, and it had a huge data breach in the UK. Now, when this process was commissioned, DeepMind was not really involved at all, except for giving the money and association to the project. They were not really involved in the agenda setting. And I say this because that was different from Meta's approach. So that also shapes the extent to which the agenda was set and how the questions were set. But what's common between these two examples is that oftentimes comes as a way to bolster some sort of effort to remedy that. They're aware, like the companies are aware of the policy concerns. They're aware that there is gaining a lot of public attention. It's adding a bit of pressure around what is the position of these companies in relation to different governance mechanisms if they apply to them, because they often tend to use the argument that all of these technologies are so novel that there are no laws to govern them. And that's why we've seen an interest in commissioning a few deliberative democratic projects. So I'll leave it with these two examples. I hope that answers the question in some way. Thanks, Felipe.
Thank you, Nardine. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your contributions as well to GloCAN. I want to be very mindful with the time, and here in Bogota, where I live, it's 6 a.m. We are an hour past, 1 minute, an hour past. So thank you very much, Kalypso and Canning. This has been a wonderful conversation and a very good start for these GloCAN seminars. I just want to invite you to the future sessions that we are going to have every Thursday at noon. And we are going to deal with different topics, and we're going to talk about all these technical papers that have been published by GloCAN. And thank you also to Melissa, of course, co-lead of GloCAN, to Nicole Curato, and to all the people here attending this webinar. Thank you very much for being here. Take care.